We often talk about journalism as this craft, and indeed it is a craft, and I think people get really, really good at it at times, especially professionals who do it every day. But one of the things that I think is lacking often in our conversation about the future of journalism then is the opposite of craft, so to speak, which would be art, right? And if you look at sort of the evolution of art, it's often really just a community of artists making statements to each other about what is or isn't art itself, right? That's sort of what pushes the boundaries. And I think journalism for a long time has focused on craft greatly to its benefit, but we've lacked a conversation about art, about pushing the boundaries and questioning what is or isn't journalism until recently. And I think that's part of what has been the reaction of the last 10 years in figuring out, well, what is the future of journalism? What is this? What is happening? Is that journalism? Is this journalism? And I think we're just starting to have that conversation, a sort of renaissance of, okay, well, what can we do? And again, going back to the original question, I don't know if funding the sort of elements of craft or funding people who do the craft is fantastic, but it leaves aside completely the question of art or pushing the boundaries of journalism, which is, now we have all these tools with technology that allow us to do those things, and that's, I think, the part of the future of journalism that has unexplored potential, which we can't even really imagine until we really appreciate the way technology and the flow of information have become combined. I'm going to give a quick sort of metaphor, believe it or not, using the Bible. I'm not religious, but because I don't want to prescribe anything here 10 years, but I think there's an interesting lesson here. The story of Moses, really interesting story, right? The Jews, they're in Egypt, they're slaves. There's, I think, 9 miracles, locusts, and the blood, the river turns to blood, and all these miracles that God performs. The Jews escape. God parts the Red Seas. And then what's really interesting is after he parts the Red Seas, the story, where does it go? They wander the desert for 40 years. And you have to ask yourself, here's this God who does all these miracles, and then he doesn't teleport them to the Promised Land, to Israel, or someplace with air conditioning. He leaves them in the desert for 40 years after all these miracles. So the humanistic interpretation of this, my humanistic interpretation, is that an entire generation of Jews had a sort of slave mentality, and they had to sort of wander in the desert before a new generation could sort of go and find this quote-unquote promised land. And I think there's something to be said about journalism as a diaspora and as a profession. We're in that wandering phase right now. So I don't know if it's going to last 40 years or 10 years, but I do see it as a transitional phase. Where a mentality has to sort of live and die because that's the only thing that was known before a quote-unquote promised land can be reached.